Anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian protests are in our streets and on our college campuses chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." Here's a question. Is Israel illegally occupying the land of Palestine? According to the Bible and history, the answer is no. But it is setting the stage for the fulfillment of some major Bible prophecies, and I'll prove it to you on this edition of the Endtime Show. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Dave Robbins with Endtime Ministries. I do thank you for joining me on this edition of the Endtime Show. By now, you've probably seen one of the pro-Palestinian protests, either in your town or perhaps on the internet or the nightly news or whatever. And they're chanting what? "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Justice is our demand. No peace on stolen land. End the aggression, stop the crimes, Israel out of Palestine." And of course, there's many, many more of them. What's really going on here? I read an article today on the Epoch Times. The title is, get this, "Drag Queens Lead Children in Free Palestine Chant at Queer Story Time for Palestine." And they were using old songs and different things to push this free Palestine false narrative to children. And also there's an article by the ADL who the title of the article is, "Who are the primary groups behind the U.S. anti-Israel rallies?" They actually say that one of them, let me go down here to the bottom really quick, is the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which is pushing socialism and communism here in America. And they're behind many of these socialist organizations, some of them tying into the Chinese Communist Party, are pushing these false narratives with the Free Palestine movement. So I want you to know, because you may have a conversation with somebody, or you may see all of this sweeping across our college campuses and through our nation and think, well, you know what? I wonder, is Israel illegally occupying that land? Did they illegally take land from the quote-unquote Palestinians? Well, we're going to answer that today, and I'm going to give you some history, some Bible, to make sure you understand what the true narrative is. The entire Free Palestine movement is based on an absolute false narrative. It goes against the Bible, number one, and it also goes against history. But anybody out here chanting, "Hey, free Palestine," they're either willfully ignoring the Bible and history, or they simply have never been educated. I'm going to prove this to you. So, first, let me mention First Cup Coffee. You know, you can imagine we're essentially working around the clock to keep up with all this news. It's crazy, really. Things are happening so fast. We're certainly energized and motivated by our God-given purpose. But man, it sure is nice to have First Cup Coffee to fuel us up in the morning. These guys are a Christian-oriented, Christian-owned Patriot Coffee Company out of Texas. There are many different roasts to choose from. So go to firstcup.com and use code ENDTIME to get 10% off. If you subscribe, they'll give you an additional 10% off. Go to firstcup.com, use code ENDTIME to get 10% off today. Also, I want to announce very quickly that last weekend we had an awesome conference down in Biloxi, Mississippi. This coming weekend, my wife and I will be in Thibodaux, Louisiana. We'll be at the House of Prayer, 2229 Highway 3185 down in Thibodaux, and I'll be there one night only, Sunday, May 5th at 5 p.m. I'll be teaching the new lesson, The Green Horseman, World War III, giving you some updates on breaking prophecy news. Certainly you'll want to be involved in that. The lesson is so relevant. It tells you what's going on in the Middle East. It lays it out for you biblically, the last spirit to arise before the Great Tribulation. It lays it out for you very clearly. It's easy to understand. So look forward to seeing you all in Thibodaux, Louisiana, 5 p.m. this coming Sunday evening. All the information is on our website, endtime.com, and go to the events tab and then conferences. All the information is right there to get you to the conference. Okay, so let's cover this false narrative of Palestine, the Palestinians. Where did it come from? What's the origin of it? Because I want you to be educated on this. Because there's so much, the news media, the nightly news, there's such a false narrative on a lot of this stuff. So a while back, the Jewish News Syndicate, very reliable news source, they published an article, How the Palestinians Got Their Name. You can go look the article up. But I want to pull some excerpts from that and go through some of that and then give you the biblical history of it. You know, Arabs living in what Jews call the land of Israel, including Judea and Samaria, they call themselves Palestinians today, after Palestine, the non-Jewish term for that region. They did not do so until really recently, but nonetheless, many Arabs in the region and their sympathizers have co-opted the words Palestine and Palestinian to give their national movement a sense of longevity, credibility, and even ownership. So when you hear all these chants with all these protests going on, it's totally based on a false narrative. There's nothing to it. There is an agenda behind it, but the message they're preaching is totally false. The word Palestine is not Arab or Middle Eastern origin. It really dates back to 1900, I should say 1900 years ago, and is derived from a people who were not native to that region. The Philistines were a people from the Aegean Sea, and they were closely related to the ancient Greeks. And they lived on the coast of what is now the Gaza Strip and Israel, but they disappeared by the 6th century BC. The name associated with them, however, did not die out. The Romans, in like a fit of spite against Israel, it reapplied that term Palestine to the land of Israel centuries later, after they defeated a Judean uprising, the revolt in 135 AD. So the Romans gave that region the name Palestine. Okay? There was not a Palestinian people that conquered the land. They're not the indigenous people of the land. No. So in effect, the Romans sought to erase the association between the land of Israel and the Jewish people. And so the Palestine moniker, it continued to be used long after the Roman Empire fell. When Muslim armies conquered that region in 629 AD, they really, let's say, Arabized, they Arabized that name, Palestine, to Philistine, which is F-I-L, F as in Frank, I-L-A-S-T-I-N, Philistine. And this term cannot be found in the Quran, while the name Israel is mentioned in there many times. So the regional name Palestine, it endured though. And during the Middle Ages, it became common in early modern English and was employed by the Crusaders. But for nearly 2,000 years, it never referred to a country or a group of people. It was just the region there. So, in short, for most of recorded history, there were never any Palestinians at all. After World War I, the modern contours of Palestine were established. Just this region here. You understand how the Middle East was cut up after World War I? There was the Palestine region was established, and the British mandate for Palestine, that originally consisted of present-day Israel, Gaza, Judea, Samaria, and Jordan. But during the British Mandate period, the term Palestinian usually referred to Jews living in the Palestine Mandate, as well as their institutions. Before Israel was founded, several prominent Jewish and Zionist organizations used the name Palestine. That included the Palestine Post, the newspaper, and the Palestine Symphony Orchestra. The Palestine Post is now called the Jerusalem Post. And because it was under the Palestine Mandate, the Palestinian region, and the Palestine Symphony Orchestra is now called the Israel Philharmonic Orchestra. So, at the time, many Arabs in British Mandatory Palestine, they considered themselves part of Greater Syria rather than Palestinians. In 1937, a local Arab leader told the Palestine Royal Commission, there's no such country as Palestine. He said, and I'm quoting here, Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. Our country for centuries was part of Syria. Arab historian Philip Hitti, he echoed that statement shortly before Israel declared independence, and he said, there's no such thing as Palestine in history. Absolutely not. And he was an Arab historian. But the watershed moment, really, for the Palestinian national movement, that came after the 1967 Six Days War, when Israel drove the Jordanians back across the Jordan River, and that's when Israel won control of Judea and Samaria from Jordan. And the words of the author Walid Shabbat, many of you have heard from him of Bethlehem, he summed it up by this profound shift in local Arabs' identity. He said this, and I'm quoting, on July 4th, 1967, I was a Jordanian, and overnight I became a Palestinian. And since 1967, a whole national mythology has been created around the terms Palestine and Palestinian. And so for somebody today to be in a protest and say, free Palestine from the river to the sea, that individual has no idea what they're talking about. It's an absolute false narrative. There were no Palestinians. There are no Palestinians. There are simply Arabs that live in that region. For example, the Palestinian Arabs have claimed to be descendants of the Canaanites who preceded the ancient Israelites and the Philistines in the Holy Land. In 2018, Palestinian Authority Chief Mahmoud Abbas told the United Nations Security Council, we are the descendants of the Canaanites that lived in the land 5,000 years ago and continue to live there to this day. But most Palestinians, they trace their origin to prominent tribes in Saudi Arabia, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and even in Egypt. Yasser Arafat, remember old stern-looking Yasser Arafat? He was born in Egypt. And even the Canaan family in Nablus, Shechem, they traced their ancestry to Syria. So in any case, the Canaanites, they disappeared more than 1,600 years before the Arabs first arrived in the Holy Land. So everything you're hearing in the news and all of these protests, I mean, I'm talking about hundreds of thousands of students in these protests all across Europe and America and in our streets, in our colleges. If you were to ask them some specific questions, and let's for just a moment take the Bible out of the equation, historically, I would say historically, prove to me how you are a Palestinian, and historically, why are you supporting this cause that you are protesting for? It's a total false narrative, everybody. Now, like I said before, it is setting the stage for two big prophetic fulfillments: the Great Tribulation and the eventual Battle of Armageddon. Because all of the world is going to be against Israel. You can see what's going on here. And it's really setting the stage for that. I just hate to see so many people here in the United States against Israel. Please educate yourself. Make sure that you know what you're talking about before you go out and start waving a 10-foot flag on the side of the road. It's a total false narrative. But I'm not so sure they're not getting paid to do it. I'd have to prove that, and I haven't documented that. But I just watched a video before I came in here, and the guy was talking about many of the same organizations that are behind this Palestinian uprising and this Islamic uprising and all of these protests are many of the same organizations that were behind the BLM movements and all of the Antifa and all that stuff back in a few years ago when all of those uprising and riots and everything happened. So there's agendas being pushed here. It's totally based on false narratives. So you got to have an agenda behind it to gather the groups, right? Palestinians have even asserted that Jesus was a Palestinian. I don't, again, no Bible, no history. In a 2013 Christmas message, Mahmoud Abbas called Jesus a Palestinian messenger. In 2019, Palestinian American activist Linda Sarsour, she posted on Twitter, Jesus was a Palestinian of Nazareth. Ma'am, have you ever studied history at all? Have you ever studied the Bible at all? A Palestinian Jew? Don't think so. Jesus was a Jew from the Judean region. And if you know where Nazareth was, and he was born in Bethlehem. And Judea was named Judea because it was and still is the homeland of the Jewish people. So, I mean, let's get our history right and let's make sure we understand the Bible. While the Arabs of the region are free to call themselves whatever they want. I mean, it's a free country, right? Or at least it is supposed to be here and over there in Israel. But they're not free really to hijack the 3,000-year history of the Holy Land for themselves. In the end, the name Palestine represents the Jews' original dispossession of their homeland 1,900 years ago. Remember, the Romans named that during the Jewish revolt in 135 A.D. Because they were saying, hey, we're going back to the ancient arch enemy of Israel was the Philistine. Remember, David fought Goliath, a Philistine. And so the Romans said, well, we're going to name this Palestine because they're trying to separate the Jews from having any correlation with that land at all, any ownership of it. That's really what's going on here. So if all of these protests going on would understand history in the Bible, number one, the Bible's the greatest history book ever written because our current history books are constantly being rewritten. But the Bible tells the whole story, folks. And that's why I love Bible prophecy, because it helps build our faith in the Word of God. Okay, so we'll get deep off into this. How do we reach this situation? What happened? Let's go through some history. Let me mention Birch Gold first. You know, these globalists, they want to, these world government enthusiasts, let's say, they want to impose digital currencies and digital IDs on their respective populations. And it would even allow officials, because of their programmability, that they could prohibit you from purchasing certain goods, freeze or seize part of your bank accounts. In essence, it would enable the governments or the central bank, which are two separate entities, by the way, but it would enable them to take more control over your bank accounts, your finances, everywhere you hold your digital money. So there are some concerned Americans that are diversifying their assets into physical gold with the help of Birch Gold Group. You know, you might want to, if you were looking to maybe get a physical asset that's held in a tax shelter retirement account, you can go to birchgold.com/endtime, get a free info kit on gold. If you've got an IRA or let's say a 401k from a previous employer that's been gathering dust for 100 years, you know, Birch Gold can help you convert that into an IRA in gold. You don't have to pay a penny out of pocket. So go to birchgold.com/endtime. Claim your free info kit on gold, because if digital currency becomes a reality, You may wish you had some gold to fall back on. Okay, so here's the question now. How in the world did we get to the present situation? Because there's going to be a two-state solution in the near future. The international community views a two-state solution as the only solution to the Israel-Palestinian conflict. There is going to be a Palestinian state alongside Israel, at the very least, an autonomous or a self-governing situation in the modern day, the biblical Judean region. It's still the biblical Judean region to me, but when we say West Bank, it's because a lot of people recognize where that is, but that's really not it's kind of almost an anti-Israel statement. So I really don't like the term West Bank. I like Judea, because that's really what it is. But how do we reach this present situation? Well, Jerusalem became Israel's capital, 3,000 years ago. And you remember that King David, he made Jerusalem Israel's capital. That was back in 1000 BC. It was David who said, if I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. David was a mighty warrior, right? He could wield the sword. But he said, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. David made Jerusalem Israel's eternal capital, the capital of Israel. And then King Solomon, David's son, he built Israel's first temple. Now, on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, dedicated it in 968 BC. And God said to Solomon concerning Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, I will put my name there forever. That's 1 Kings 9:3. So the Babylonians then, of course, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, they destroyed the first temple in 586 BC. And they carried the people of Judea away into Babylonian captivity for 70 years. That's when Daniel, the three Hebrew children, and many of their contemporaries, they went down into Babylonian captivity. That's when the book of Daniel was written, while Daniel was down in Babylonian captivity. Well, after that 70-year exile, the Jews returned back to Jerusalem, and they rebuilt the temple. Zerubbabel, you guys know the story, okay? So the second temple was completed in 516 BC. Jerusalem continued to be Israel's capital until the Romans destroyed the second temple in 70 AD. And then it was around 135 AD that the Roman Emperor Hadrian forbid Jews from enter Jerusalem. And of course, that's when he named, Rome named that region Palestine, to not give the Jews any kind of a correlation there to that they had no identity here. He was trying to do away with that. Just, cut that part of history off, let's say. Well, after that, Jews were allowed to visit Jerusalem only one day of the year, Tisha B'Av. And this was the day on which the Jews mourned the destruction of the first and second temples. Because of the escalating Roman persecution, Jews began to be scattered throughout the world. And for the next almost 1,878 years, Jews were exiled. Religious Jews prayed 3 times each day for the rebuilding of the temple with their faces turned towards Jerusalem. And when Jews were parting company, let's say they had a big meeting, a bar mitzvah, whatever, when they were parting company, their customary greeting was, next year in Jerusalem. Wherever they were at, Russia, Europe, scattered all over, they would always say, next year in Jerusalem. The dream never died for them. Well, during that exile, it became a Jewish custom during the marriage ceremony for the groom to crush a glass beneath his foot, and that was to signify that on the happiest day of his life, that he could not totally be happy while the Jewish temple was destroyed. So there was a man named Theodore Herzl, father of the modern Jewish state, and he was there was really a yearning for many to return to Israel, and that began to intensify in the Jewish hearts during the latter part of the 19th century. And so Theodor Herzl, he was a Hungarian Jew, and he grew up attempting to fit into European culture. But he's like, it's just not possible for him. And he grew to believe that anti-Semitism could not be defeated or cured. It could only be avoided. And the only way to avoid it was to establish a Jewish state for his people. And so in June of 1895, he wrote in his diary, in Paris, I recognize the emptiness of the futility of trying to combat anti-Semitism. He said, we just got to avoid it. We need our own nation. And it was around that time that Theodor Herzl started writing these pamphlets about a Jewish state. And little did he know that he was helping to the fulfillment of a Bible prophecy, Ezekiel chapter 37. He was aiding in that. And so Theodor Herzl claimed these pamphlets resulted in the establishment of the Zionist movement. And of course they did play a large role in that movement's rise and success. But of course, at the end of the day, it was Almighty God that drew them back. Theodor Herzl, you know, maybe God used him to help set the stage for that, but certainly it was God. Ezekiel chapter 37, Ezekiel's boneyard, God telling Ezekiel, prophesy, this is the whole house of Israel that I will gather back together. But there were many people that played a part in that. Well, Theodor Herzl spent the rest of his life visiting presidents, prime ministers, urging the establishment of a Jewish state. And he predicted that within 50 years of his death, a Jewish state would be born. He died in 1904, and the state of Israel was born in 1948. And today he's revered as the father of the state of Israel. But there's no Palestinian nation up to that point. We're going to get deeper off into it on the other side of the break.
A voice spoke to me and said, I've got something I want to show you. I was so sure God had talked to me. And I was stunned on what I saw.
A direct fulfillment of this over 2,500-year-old prophecy. The United States will stand with Israel.
Why haven't I ever seen this before?
1/3 of humanity will die. What do these beasts symbolize?
The lion, the bear, the leopard.
The combined beast from Revelation 13 represents the end-time government of the Antichrist. Understanding the end time.
Now streaming on Endtime Plus and available to order at endtime.com/UET. Go to endtime.com/UET or call 800-ENDTIME.
What if you could understand Bible prophecy? Dave Robbins, the host of the Endtime Show's TV and radio programs, is holding a free prophecy conference near you. Gain peace and understanding about what the Bible says concerning end-time prophecy. Call 1-800-ENDTIME or go to endtime.com/events to see when Dave will be in a location near you.
Isn't it amazing that the Bible is true every time? I mean, I know I say it's amazing, it's just a given to me. But many people, if you don't understand the Bible and how accurate it is, when you read through the Bible sometimes, I've had people say, you know, I don't know if it, you know, is that really what God's trying to tell us? I'm like, it's right there. Look at your Bible. But a lot of people, you know, one of the things that really shocks me more than just about everything is the amount of biblical illiteracy that we have in society today. People don't know their Bible. Folks, your eternal salvation is based on partially your knowledge of the Bible. Do I understand salvation? How many gods are there? Do I understand the God of heaven is coming back to establish a kingdom here on the earth? Do I know how to be a part of that kingdom? I mean, this should be the number one thing on your list every day. But people get caught up in so many things, and the Bible, that's hard to understand, and when it's really pretty easy. But if you look at all of these protesters, I mean hundreds of thousands, supposedly smart college kids, I say supposedly, that have no idea of what they're even protesting, because every single one of them is protesting a false narrative. Every single one. Everybody holding that red, black, white, and green flag, which has nothing to do with the four horsemen of the apocalypse, but everyone they're protesting a false narrative. And so, if they would just educate themselves and understand what does the Bible say and what does history say, they would realize, I probably ought to go do something else because what I'm doing means nothing. Back in, let me continue on with this timeline. I feel like Paul Harvey, like at the end of this I'm going to say, and now you know the rest of the story, but back in, let's go back to where was he at here? The Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire captured Jerusalem in 1516 AD. The Ottoman control of the Middle East continued until World War I. And with the defeat of the Turkey's Ottoman Empire in 1917, control of the Middle East shifted to Great Britain and France. And now, and this brings into the carving up of Palestine and the region and the Middle East and different things like that. And then now we're going to come to the Balfour Declaration. I wish these guys understood all this history. It's so awesome. But let me mention Ready Pantry really quickly. As Americans, we want to believe that the grocery stores will always be there, right? That's how we get our food. But as you can see, a few years ago, the supply chains can quickly collapse, food supplies could diminish, and we certainly pray for the best, but we need to prepare. There's nothing wrong with that. So what if there was a way to have an affordable emergency supply of food? Well, there is. ReadyPantry.com/endtime. They offer amazing 25-year shelf-stable food, breakfast, lunch, dinners, and desserts. And it's not to mention you get a peace of mind just knowing that if something happens and the grocery stores are bombarded by 10,000 people, the shelves are empty, that, hey, I've got some food for me and my family back here in one of my closets, right? And Ready Pantry, they're an American-based company with all the products sourced right here in America. You're not going to be disappointed. Many long-term food storage companies on the internet, they're selling products that have been sitting on their warehouse shelves for years in these giant warehouses. Ready Pantry doesn't do that. They deliver the freshest products that are packaged within the last couple months to your door. And they offer discounts, Ready Pantry, up to 20% off for 3 to 12 month supplies. Go to ReadyPantry.com/endtime. Use code endtime. Save an additional 10% off on your order. You never pay shipping on any of your orders. And they have buy now, pay later options that are available at checkout by going to ReadyPantry.com/endtime. All right, now, man, I love history. Back in high school, I couldn't stand history. But now I love it because it helps us validate the Bible. Actually, the Bible, in my mind, doesn't need validated, but for some people it does. And history helps to do that. If you go talk about the Balfour Declaration, when the Holy Land came under the control of the British influential Jews, they petitioned the British government to facilitate the establishment of a homeland for the Jews. And on November 2nd, 1917, British Foreign Minister Arthur Balfour, he wrote to the Lord Walter Rothschild, and he said, His Majesty's government views with favor the establishment in Palestine, and again, not the country of Palestine, but in that Palestine region, the mandate, the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. Well, of course, this historic statement from the British government, that became known as the Balfour Declaration. But if you remember the British mandate at the 1920 San Remo Conference, the victor nations of World War I, they assigned that the mandate for Palestine, which was that region. It was not a country. It was simply a region that was given to them this at the San Remo Conference. The mandate for Palestine to the United Kingdom under Article 22 of the Covenant of the League of Nations. And the Allies also decided to make the UK responsible for putting into effect its own Balfour Declaration in 1917. So this action of the League of Nations, it enshrined the Balfour Declaration into international law. So, we're moving along this timeline. When you come to Hitler's horrible Holocaust, oh my goodness, such a dark place in American history. In 1939, the world's worst war that has ever taken place broke out. Not the worst one that will ever take place, the worst one that has up to this point. And over the next 6 years, 52 million plus human beings met violent deaths. And among those were 6 million Jews that Adolf Hitler shipped off to concentration camps. Just when the Jewish people thought their lives couldn't get any worse, it did. Hitler's gas chambers and crematoriums, they cruelly snuffed out young and old alike. And Hitler's goal was to rid the earth of the Jews once and for all. I've been to the Gestapos and things in Germany, and it was horrific what he did to people. Crippled people, black people, homosexuals, anybody who did not, Jews, anybody who did not align up to his perfect race he was trying to create. He killed his own cousin because she was crippled. Horrific situation. I mean, the guy was demonic. He had to be. Well, he called his extermination campaign the final solution. Then, after that, the UN votes to establish a Jewish state. When the magnitude of Hitler's horrible Holocaust was revealed to the world, many of the nations over there turned a blind eye to it and wouldn't help them. The collective guilt of the world's nations compelled them to finally grant the Jewish people a place to call home. On November 29, 1947, the United Nations voted to partition the area of the British Mandate, get this, into an Arab state, because there were Arabs living there, and not necessarily, there was no country of Palestine. It was just the British Mandate, that region there, the Palestine region. There was no country. This is in 1947, you guys. If people protesting today would only understand just a small portion of history, they would realize that their narrative is totally, it just means nothing. But they've been brainwashed, right? So, in November 1947, the United Nations voted to partition the area of the British Mandate into an Arab state and an Israeli state. Well, the Jews, they were like, awesome. They were thrilled to have a homeland for almost, after almost 2,000 years. And they had been sifted through the nations, and so they accepted the partition plan with joy. And I mean, it was a lot smaller than what they have today, just a strip of land. But they were happy to get it. But get this, and this is one of the crazy parts of all of this. The Arabs that lived there, they immediately rejected the UN plan. What the people that call themselves, they're Arabs, but what the people that call themselves Palestinians are fighting for today, they could have had more land if they just would have accepted this. Now, they really want to drive Israel off into the sea. The PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was designed to liberate that land of Jews. So they really don't want just pre-67 borders. They want to really drive Israel off into the sea. They don't want any Jews. They don't want any Israel. But in this partition plan by the United Nations, the Jews accepted what they were given, but the Arabs rejected it. They didn't want a state. They simply wanted to eradicate the Jews. Well, Israel declared their independence on May 14, 1948, just after that. So after policing that area of Palestine, this region, it was not a country, there was no flag, there was no Palestinian flag, never had been. But after policing that area of Palestine for 28 years, the British were tired of the continual conflict between the Arabs and the Jews, and they just wanted out. Well, finally, the British announced, hey, we're concluding the British Mandate on May 14, 1948. The decision was made that they would leave that Palestine with no one to keep order there. And so when the British forces left on May 14, 1948, the Jews made their move. They declared their independence the same day. They accepted the UN partition, and they declared their independence on the little sliver of land that was given to them. Well, on May 15th, the very next day, 5 Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq, they launched a war against this newborn Jewish state. And in 1949, it lasted from May 15, 1948 to all the way into 1949. It was the War for Independence. In 1949, there was a ceasefire that was reached between Jordan and Israel. And Jordan, up to that point, they occupied the West Bank, Judea, Samaria. And this was in 1949. At the end of that, the armistice. And they occupied, like I said, the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and East Jerusalem, which included the Temple Mount. And Israel controlled its portion, the partitioned area, plus the gains that were made in the war. And that included West Jerusalem. So Israel had more than what the UN partition plan had originally given them, but they went to war. Okay. So Jerusalem was Israel's capital from 1000 BC to 70 AD, and then 1948 to present. And so you're seeing history here. We're living through history. We're living through the fulfillment of Ezekiel chapter 37, the rebirth of the nation of Israel. They're still being born. The prophecy is not completely fulfilled yet. God has not put His Spirit into them yet. And so we're going to continue on with this because I want you to know the true narrative.
They that understand what is taking place will instruct many.
Except a man is born again, he can't enter or see the kingdom of God.
I don't care what label you've been given or what label you've given yourself. You are essential. You still matter.
This is a journey, and when we get to the other side of that, that's where our prize is. That's where our reward is.
End time is not going anywhere.
On January 23rd, 1950, Israel's Knesset passed a resolution officially stating that Jerusalem was the capital of Israel. During the 67 Six Days War, Israel took control of East Jerusalem, reuniting the city, and on July 30, 1980, the Knesset officially annexed East Jerusalem by passing the Jerusalem Law, which declared the city to be the eternal and undivided capital of Israel. Of course, the UN declared Israel's annexation of Jerusalem illegal. Well, who's the United Nations? I mean, they're a world governing body. I mean, come on, they're going to try to override what God did 4,000 years ago? I mean, come on. But on August 20, 1980, the United Nations, the Security Council Resolution 478, declared the Knesset's 1980 Jerusalem law, declaring Jerusalem as Israel's eternal and indivisible capital, that it was null and void and must be rescinded forthwith. And this resolution advised member states to withdraw their diplomatic representation from the city as a punitive measure. Well, as a result, all of the nations of the world moved their embassies to Tel Aviv, including the United States. And then the question becomes, has Jerusalem ever been the capital of another nation? Jerusalem was under foreign occupation from 70 AD to 1948. East Jerusalem was under Jordanian control from 1948 to 67. And yet during this span of almost 1,897 years of foreign occupation, Jerusalem was never made the capital of any of the occupying powers. Once Israel officially declared Jerusalem to be its eternal undivided capital, the nations of the world declared this illegal and unacceptable. Every nation on earth chooses its own capital, and it is accepted by the United Nations except for one nation, Israel. And then, of course, in May of 1993, Israel signed the Jerusalem Covenant. So Israel entered into this peace negotiations at Oslo, Norway in 91. When the negotiations became serious in 93, Israel realized the Arabs that called themselves Palestinians, let's put it like that they would demand the surrender of East Jerusalem as a price for peace. So they determined that their eternal capital must never be surrendered or divided. So Israel issued a document called the Jerusalem Covenant. And it stated that Jerusalem would never be surrendered or divided under any circumstance, period. The Jerusalem Covenant was signed by Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, President Ezer Weizmann, Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek, Knesset Speaker Sheva Weiss, and many other Israeli officials. And it was then placed on the main floor of the Israeli Knesset, where it is displayed until this day. And then, of course, you had the Jerusalem Embassy Act. Now, I'm bringing you way up closer to 95. And so recognizing the unfair bias against the Israel at the UN on October 23rd, 95, the U.S. Congress passed the Jerusalem Embassy Act. And that law required the moving of the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem by May of 1999. But it also called for Jerusalem to remain an undivided city and for it to be recognized as the capital of the state of Israel. And the law was adopted by our Senate 93-5 and the House 374-37. However, President Clinton, Bush, George W. Bush, and Obama, they all disobeyed the Jerusalem Embassy Act. And for 22 years, they used the excuse of endangering national security, and they signed the waiver every 6 months. But the true reason was fear of offending the Arabs and the United Nations. Well, then, of course, at that time, presidential candidate Trump, he promised to move the embassy. And he was speaking before AIPAC in March 21 of 2016, and he said this. He said, and I'm quoting, "We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem." Well, when he said that, me and my father-in-law, Irvin Baxter, we were wondering, yeah, right. All the other guys have said it, but they've never done it. We'll see what this Trump guy does, because we didn't know him. I still don't know him. But under the Trump administration, the U.S. Embassy officially opened in Jerusalem on May 14th of 2018. But then, of course, there was Obama's betrayal, the UN Resolution 2334. After the Trump election took place on November 8, 2016, President Obama's true feelings toward Israel were publicly displayed for all the world to see. Obama still wielded the power of the presidency until Trump was inaugurated in January of 2017. So on December 23, 2016, President Obama permitted the United Nations to pass a terribly harmful resolution against Israel. We call it one of the Armageddon resolutions. Because the UN passed Resolution 2334, which stated that Israel's presence in the territories liberated from Jordanian occupation during the 67 Six Days War, including East Jerusalem and the West Bank region, was a flagrant violation of international law. And that resolution declared Israel's presence in their God-given promised land of Judea, Samaria, and on her Temple Mount, that it was illegal in the eyes of the under international law. And why do we call that the Armageddon resolution, or one of them? Because it will be resolutions like this that the United Nations will use to invade Israel at the Battle of Armageddon to try to enforce these types of resolutions. Because Israel will never bow down to the edicts of the world governing body. Right now, Israel is standing against the international community and what she's wanting to do, protecting herself. Even the United States is trying for a ceasefire and trying to get her to stand down, don't go into Rafah, and all. You guys know the story. And Israel's saying, Netanyahu has said, we're going to do what's in Israel's best interest, regardless of who, what the international community says. That's where we're at right now. In 2020, of course, the Abraham Accords and the Peace to Prosperity under Donald Trump. Trump helped broker agreements in 2020 that was known collectively as the Abraham Accords. And this was one of the things that really set off the October 7th invasion of Israel. The Abraham Accords, it was to normalize relations between Israel and Arab countries, including, in the beginning, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain. Both Hamas and Abbas rejected the accords, and through their concerts with the United Arab Emirates deal, Israel agreed to halt annexation of land in the West Bank. That's really one of the reasons the United Arab Emirates entered into the Abraham Accords, was to stop them from annexing all that land in the West Bank. But earlier that year, the Trump administration, I think it was in February of that year, they proposed the Peace to Prosperity plan that was aimed at mediating relations between Israel and the Palestinians. It proposed a peace plan. And of course, that didn't happen. Then on October 7th, 2023, Hamas attacks Israel. There was a brutal surprise attack by Hamas. You guys know that it included rocket strikes and a ground invasion after militants breached the security fence between Gaza and Israel. My wife and I, we had a tour group there. Many people listening to me probably were on the tour. And of course, these Hamas fighters, they come in gunning down Israeli civilians, taking hostages, including old people, children. Many of the children were killed. At one point during the attack, Hamas militants rampaged through an Israeli music festival, killing hundreds of people. And they ended up killing just over 1,200 people in all. And during the assault, the group used a pattern of horrific rape, mutilation, and extreme brutality against women. Unimaginable stuff I'm not even going to mention on the radio. Horrible. Demonic, really. That happened while we were in Israel, October 7th. October 2023, Israel responds with air assault, ground invasion. Israel's response was indeed swift, of course, and intense, obviously. Israel's fought all the way down through Gaza and is preparing to invade the city of Rafah. And, you know, over the last few weeks and months, there have been international onlookers that have controversially called for Israel's actions in Gaza. They've called it genocide. And in December 2023, South Africa filed this legal case alleging that specifically in the International Court of Justice that several countries, including Canada, Italy, Spain, that they've halted arms sales to Israel, and all Israel's trying to do is defend herself. So, but regardless, Israel has expanded its operations in the enclave, and there are officials outlining plans to do the ground invasion in that city of Rafah, and the United States has opposed those plans and has shown a growing willingness to disagree with Israel in public. And of course, regional tensions flared back on a couple of weeks ago when Iran launched that anticipated yet unprecedented retaliatory attack on Israel in response to a suspected Israeli bombing of an Iranian consulate building up in Syria. And the Iranian backed that attack, which reportedly involved over 300 munitions, that resulted in virtually no infrastructure damage to Israel because Israel hammered down on them and shot a bunch of them down. Of course, the United States and several others helped as well. But I wanted to, and so now, here we are. Now we've got this totally false narrative that we have huge pro-Palestinian protests in our streets and on our college campuses. What in the world is going on, folks? And I want you to know that it is agenda-driven. I guarantee you, if these people understood history and believed and understood the Bible, they would never do this because it's totally a false narrative. Why are they doing it? What's the agenda that's being pushed here? There are many things that are happening. Again, I told you, there are many socialist organizations that are behind funding this pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian situation in Israel. And one of the ways I know that is because back on October 10th, the invasion of into Israel by Hamas on October 7th, it was quite a while before Israel did her response into several days. I lived through it. We were there. We were there all the way till that happened, I think, on a Saturday. We were there till the next Sunday. Israel didn't go right in and immediately their ground invasion and different things. But on October 10th, Israel declared a state of war the next day on October 8th. A couple days later, there was an article in the Times of Israel that said the U.S. Democrats lash socialist organizations for backing a rally supporting the Hamas attack. The Democratic Socialist of America, castigated by U.S. Congress members, New York leadership, and other supporting protests, dozens of Harvard student groups blame Israel for terror and the onslaught. So 2 days after, before Israel ever started, a lot of these people are protesting what Israel's doing to Hamas, but yet 3 days after the attack, before Israel even really started their ground invasion, there were people with the Democratic Socialist of America that were doing rallies and supporting this before it ever really even started. So what's really going on here? There are agendas being pushed. But I'm telling you, don't believe the false narrative of, free Palestine from the river to the sea. It's a total false narrative. The people don't understand history. They certainly don't understand the Bible, but it is agenda-driven, and it's leading to some very big prophecy fulfillments.